And joining us live for the first time, been waiting a long time for this one, Mr. Jordan Sather. How are you, Jordan?
Doing fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, man. And you've been doing a little extra work, extracurricular work outside of the stuff that you've been publishing on your channels, and of course, a lot of new shifting landscapes in your life right now. But you are not the only one. There's so many people have been gobbled up by this ridiculous purging movement that is just, I don't know. This seems like round 2 right now of what's been going on. What are your thoughts on just, how the internet is evolving or devolving? Are you hopeful still, even though you've encountered this kind of pushback?
Absolutely. The internet is pivotal in evolving us as a society. The way information can be shared, both misinformation and true information, of course, but just the speed at which we can get various pieces of data out there for the public to consume, and the way that people are coming together to work together to investigate certain things. It's amazing. And I would absolutely say this is definitely round 2. We saw round 1 after the Parkland shooting, and many people's channels, including mine, were taken down. And now we are 3 months after that. We're a couple false flags later, and they're essentially pulling the exact same thing yet again. They're targeting the channels that are going to be the most detrimental to their narrative agenda. So those who speak the loudest, of course, on a variety of topics. They've been going after health channels, I've found lately. Lots of natural health, CBD channels, kratom channels, and whatnot. But of course, they're always going after the channels that are talking about their false flags, that are talking about the political corruption, that are talking about the energy technologies and what they harbor in secret. So yeah, man, it's definitely round 2, but it does not get me down, because the only reason that we are taking so much flack is because we are so close to the end and we are right over the target.
I have some things I want to talk about with energy, and especially energy weapons or just free energy in itself. But I have those ideas to come around to a little bit more toward the end of the talk. So I'm going to keep that in mind, because I think what you had just said, I think the importance of what you just said as far as being able to put in, and before we called you, I used the term competing thoughts, competing ideas, anything like that, to be able to put out there alternative ways of looking at everything, whether it be the ongoing energy crisis we're always told that we have to solve, even though the biggest solutions to the energy crisis will never actually be spoken about in a public sphere, and that perhaps the solutions have already been they've already been reached, but they might be in a bunker somewhere with the Ark of the Covenant in the end of Indiana Jones, something like that. With that being said, stifling people who are bringing these new ideas or these hidden and suppressed ideas to the fore, that is just something that is so interesting, because, well, you'll see at the end. I wanted to bring up a little clip that actually, you know what? To hell with it. Let's do it right now. In 2016, I don't know if you saw this, but in 2016, are you familiar with Stranger Things, the Netflix series?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot I could say about that.
Okay, so you know about the Montauk Project and all that stuff, and the Energy Department and whatnot, and we're
literally just filming David Wilcock about 20 minutes ago, and we were talking about that.
Okay. Well, now here's the big thing about this. In October of 2016, on Chelsea Handler's show. So you want to talk about an audience full of people with the intellectual capacity of turtle doves. That is what was going on here. On Chelsea Handler's show, they had, I think that it was Ernest, where the hell do I have it over here? Oh, here's the link right here. It's Ernest Moniz. I want you to listen to this just for a second. Let me know if you can hear this audio first and foremost. Let me know if this comes through, and I want to just put this on out there.
I have a curious question for you. I don't know if you ever saw Stranger Things.
Can you hear that?
No, I can't hear that.
You can't hear that. Okay, so I'm not even going to play it then. They have Ernest Moniz on, who at that time is serving his second round as the Secretary of the Energy Department, and they're asking him about his thoughts on Stranger Things, because of course the Energy Department is a key figure. It's actually the key villain inside of the story Stranger Things, and of course It leads us to all these stories about Montauk and opening up portals and remote viewing and creatures coming in from different dimensions accidentally, running amok inside of laboratories, and all of these tall tales that we've always heard coming out of these very shadowy, nefarious buildings in the middle of the woods or on Long Island somewhere. And what he said actually was so profound that this audience that otherwise does not even ponder things like this didn't even know how to react to what he said. And what he says in this is that we actually do dabble in other dimensions, and that not only we have some enforcement and policy enforcement responsibilities, like, for example, being there to make sure that the Iran deal is being enforced and abided by and all that stuff. But they also have an interest in natural sciences and how the universe itself is constructed. And that to do that, they use theoretical physics and stuff like that. They actually do research into higher dimensions other than the third. And this was something that people really didn't even know how it went over all of their heads. But people like you and I and Rob, I think that's one of those things like, whoa, does anybody understand what he just said there? So
Totally.
As far as the Department of Energy, dimensions, and of course, being a part of a movement of trying to squeak these kind of ideas out to a public who have never, ever been educated on it, what do you think it is? It's like when the only kind of tidbits of information you get this is when they appear on Chelsea Handler and it's capped off by some kind of a slurring joke at the end.
Right. So where do I want to go with this? Two things, first and foremost. One is that there's actually plenty of information out there about the Montauk Project. There was a book written by an author named Preston Nichols that goes into it. It's a decent book. So there's a lot of information out there about it. Of course, it's just suppressed and, in the underground and grassroots levels and whatnot. And on the second part of that, I would say that a lot of that fiction that we see on Netflix and in Hollywood movies and whatnot, a lot of that is more truth than actual fiction. And when we're particularly talking about Stranger Things and the Montauk Project, for those out there who aren't familiar with what the Montauk Project is, it was an offshoot of the CIA's MK Ultra programs that ran in the 1970s and 80s on Montauk Island. That's a little island right north of Long Island in New York. And on Montauk Island there, for the Montauk Project, what they were doing is they actually had a chair. They had a chair. It was a seat that they had gotten from a crashed UFO. So they retrieved this seat from a crashed UFO, and they were trying to reverse engineer the seat and figure out what the heck was going on with it. So what happened is that they figured out that when they use a very specific electric charge, voltage that's high enough, and put it into the chair, and they have an occupant that's very psychically trained sitting in the chair, that's very good at remote viewing and these various psychic phenomenon or psychic powers, if you will, and they actually start thinking about a particular, say, object or whatever the case was, and the chair is powered up, they're sitting in the chair, it essentially amplifies their psychic powers, and they can literally materialize stuff in the room. That's what they were doing with this Montauk Project. So they were using people, remote viewers, to manifest things in the room, actual physical objects.
So is that where the Montauk Monster came from? Did somebody actually manifest a monster?
That's actually how the Montauk Project ended, which is very interesting that they put that in Stranger Things. So they got to dabbling around into this chair. Oh, they could manifest things. Well, they also were beginning to delve into portal travel, actual wormhole travel. So, for instance, truth in plain sight, Stargate SG-1, perfect example of this, where you have an actual portal that can teleport you to whatever, IP address or whatever coordinates you put into that portal. So they were actually able to do this in the Montauk Project using the person's psychic abilities. So they were opening up portals. The person would think about some particular place, a portal would open up there, and they were actually first testing it on homeless people. They would grab homeless people off the streets of Long Island and try to get them to go through the portal and bring them back. And they killed most of them, but they actually found a little bit of success with a few of them. So they were dabbling into actually this wormhole travel and whatnot. And eventually they actually opened up a portal that allowed a monster through, essentially an actual physical monster, not just a higher density. I don't like to say dimensional. That's a long conversation, the difference between dimension and density. But it was a actual physical monster that came through the portal and trashed the place. And that's essentially what ended the Montauk Project. For more information on this, there's the book I mentioned, but there's also a great website called conscioushugs.org. And that website is run by an insider named Daniel. He calls himself Daniel, it's a pseudonym, but Daniel actually worked at the Montauk Project. He is an insider that gave David Wilcock some information about a decade ago. Then he went and started his own website and put some writing and whatnot on there. So you can actually go through the papers that he's uploaded there and get a great kind of big picture understanding on the physics behind time travel, space travel and whatnot, and a lot of this kind of timeline, interdimensional kind of understanding.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you have a formal science background, or is all of this just fueled by passion and self-education? Because you delve into some pretty deep stuff, and I always wondered about your education on this. Even though I know, like I said before, living in the information age, as long as you pair that up with passion, you'd be able to figure most things out. So I was just always wondered about that.
I'm actually a proud college dropout, and I think that's one of the reasons why I am able to understand and discuss this subject content so well, is because I didn't have the programs introduced into me in college as most people do. So I essentially, I like whiteboards. I had a clean whiteboard, a clean slate when I began delving into a lot of this, quote, alternative conspiracy, basically real world research.
Now, the presentation has been great. It's always been very clean. But that's the other thing too, man. I said this again in the opening. The thing that bothers me so much, and the reason why you got canned right now. First of all, do you think that there's any recourse? Do you think there's any hope that the channel is going to be reinstated? Have you made any progress in the days that this has happened to you?
Yes and no. So yes, there's been no is because I actually filed an appeal when the channel was suspended, and amazingly enough, that appeal was rejected almost instantly. It was within a couple hours, which is pretty much instant in YouTube time. So I heard back very quick that they would not accept my appeal. But then I'm going through some hopefully legal means to get it reinstated as well. So, crossing my fingers, slim chance. It was an absolute atrocity, nonsensical reason in which they deleted my YouTube channel. And in fact, it wasn't really a reason given. They just said, your channel, your video, went against our community guideline strikes. Here's our community guidelines, but they never made that connection as to how exactly I violated anything.
Well, listen, I saw that video because I know that you reposted it on BitChute. But for people who are just meeting you for the first time, and for people who have not seen the video and they just know about the fallout afterwards, can you just put in a quick nutshell? Because I know it was a few minutes long there. Can you put in a quick nutshell all of the points that you had hit in that video? Maybe we can draw some lines there of what was probably the hot button issues.
Yeah, so I'm going to tell you exactly what I was talking about in that video, and I'll tell you all of the subjects that I've ever been censored for, so we can kind of cross-reference. And I'll just give you a big picture as to all the things at least I've been censored or demonetized or whatnot for. In that particular video, I was talking about QAnon. It was essentially a news update. So a lot of the videos I do, I just give my own commentary and opinion on current events in the world. And I was talking about QAnon. I do think that QAnon is still very legitimate, and that there's a large psychological operation and information war going on against QAnon right now. My own personal opinion. So I was talking about QAnon. I was talking about the Inspector General report and all the stuff coming out against the FBI right now, the spying. And then I was also talking about, of course, the false flag operations, the agenda in play that we see with those, and then the narrative push in the mainstream media that we're seeing against, quote, conspiracy theorists and whatnot. So, of course, a lot of things that are going against the grain.
That would have to be purely
probably the one right there.
That would have to be purely the false flag thing, because far you brought up QAnon, you say that you still think that there's a lot of legitimacy behind the publishing of those posts and whatnot. And I know that was it Roger Stone that brought you on Infowars, and am I getting that right?
It wasn't him that contacted me. It was a liaison, somebody else, but I went on to Roger Stone's show, or
Right.
the War Room on InfoWars.
See, the reason why
yeah.
I don't think that would be the issue is because, especially as you know right now, I mean, there's so much infighting within the whole QAnon thing, which is I'm so glad
Yeah.
I've kept my my distance from this nonsense. But
Good on you.
yeah, but that's just the thing. I think that at that point, why even go after anybody talking about that when the snake is eating itself at this point? But the other thing, a couple of months ago, you talked about Parkland, even the mention of the word crisis actor, the mention of the phrase, I should say, the mention of it was enough to get people, hiding from punishment. So I would have to imagine that anything you're talking about with the false flags that has to do with loss of life, especially loss of life of minors, that had to be it, man.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. And that's a very touchy subject, of course, because it is so pertinent and newsworthy and time sensitive. That's something, and it's also very convenient, very easy way for them to say, oh, you're, slandering hate speech, whatever the very vague reason they attribute to censoring somebody. But yeah, I do agree. It was definitely that.
Well, let me ask you this. What about the whole QAnon thing? Just real quick, because I want to move on to
Totally.
something else. What about the whole QAnon scenario has kept you most engaged and still really believing that there is authenticity behind the I guess this day-to-day documentation of events?
I would guess the reason, the particular viewpoint that I take is, let me just kind of rephrase it here real quick, of course, because we have more to talk about. I have heard about a behind-the-scenes alliance or a white hat group planning a takedown of the deep state and mass arrests of these perpetrators for a long time. I heard of this back in 2011, 2012, so it's not a new concept to me. And I think that's why I have a bigger picture, or maybe, I don't want to say clearer necessarily, maybe a clearer view, but it's a different view than many people do, is because these concepts aren't new to me. When Q popped onto the scene, I was like, I know what this is. And I was one of the very first ones that was very vocal about it. And still, when taking in all the data, not just cherry-picked data, not just a few viewpoints that feel good to you to believe, and throwing away some other ones that are true, when taking in all the data, I still feel like Q is a behind-the-scenes white hat team that is connected very much to elements of the DoD and the current political administration that is working to take down the deep state. But understand, Q, they say they have everything, but let's be real, because of the compartmentalization of everything going on, they don't have everything. And it's just it's unfortunate, because it's a natural human mindset to identify and to get into an idea of tribalism and to need a savior. So a lot of people are looking to Q as a savior, but they're not necessarily doing it, ill-intentionally or anything like that. It's just there's still a lot there that people have yet to see. But
either way, the news is going into very, very interesting directions. No matter what you say, you have the IG report that's coming out. The FISA abuses are all real. The spying is real. All the things that were being spoken about in hushed tones and were being laughed at only about a year and a half ago, they are all coming out, and the tide is really turning. So even if you're just concentrating on what is in front of us and what is verifiable, even though and what is the most verifiable thing is that the media is completely corrupt, and that you can see that the media is actually working in tandem with a corrupt element of our intelligence community. And and if that's all you have to go by, then fine. The rest of the stuff I just like to keep in the back of my mind, because of course it's causing a lot of problems for a lot of people right now. So it's fun to watch the fireworks a little bit. But let's move on because I have something.
Can I say one more thing about that?
Please go ahead.
Just something that kind of blows my mind every single day. If you put yourself in the position of somebody that is behind the scenes in whatever alphabet agency trying to take down the deep state, just think of the way that they're doing it, using Q, being anonymous, being coded, sending messages through 8chan to other operators in the field. It's just like, it's ingenious, and really there's no other way that they could have done it. So in empathizing in the situation and putting yourself in the shoes there, I think that also gives a little bit clearer picture on why they're doing things and how they're doing it as well. So that's just something for people out there to kind of ruminate on. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on.
Noted, man. And you know, another big thing that you have aside from QAnon and aside from a lot of the other, you know, current events, especially the more sensitive ones there too, secret space program. Now,
Yes.
just as a little bit of background as far as this show goes, because I know that you're a very busy guy, so I don't think that you'd been able to keep up with the Joneses over here. But on this show, more than a few times, we've spoken about 1947. It's a year that is often referenced on this show because it's known as the Summer of the Saucers in both the American Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. And for all intents and purposes, the Truman administration oversaw was pretty much the birth of what would become the modern day intelligence services and what would be called by some as the shadow government. You have the emergence of the NSA, you have the CIA, you have what would become the Energy Department, the establishment of the Air Force as an independent entity. And then, of course, you have Project Blue Book and a whole bunch of programs there and a lot of money and resources and manpower being looked into the UFO phenomenon, because at first a lot of people thought it could have been either German or Soviets or whatever the hell it was, but there was a lot being put into this. Now, when you refer to the secret space program, does your research begin around that same period of time? But where does all of this begin for you, this storyline?
It's funny you mentioned Germans in there really quick, because funny enough, many of those UFO sightings in the late 40s and 50s were most likely German saucer craft. And that's my answer to the question, is that I would actually, where I would start in looking into the secret space program UFO phenomenon would be about 3 decades before 1947 in the 1910s and 20s in Nazi Germany. That's where I would begin it. And
the Nazi party, we're not talking about Nazi party in the 10s and 20s.
Well, we're talking about, German secret societies such as the Thule Society and the Vril Society, and then the Nazi Party coming out of that in the 30s and whatnot. So thanks for the clarification there. But that's where I would begin it, is with those German secret societies. And there was a few different ways in which they gained the technology and some of the research to begin building out very quickly. One of those ways was through Earth-based scientists, one of those being Victor Schauberger. Another one of those ways was through the use of a channeled medium. Her name was Maria Orsic. She channeled for the Vril Society in Germany in the 1910s and 20s. So that's a couple ways. And there were some also technological exchanges with ET races and whatnot. But basically the Germans got this technology before the Americans did. And the Germans were much more interested in building out this technology, and they were much more able to do it than the Americans. So they actually, pre and during World War II, the Germans were able to build out more advanced stuff. But here's the thing. They didn't have the manpower to defeat the Allies on the ground in Europe. So Americans could build 10 tanks for every 1 tank that the Germans could. They were just slaughtering the Germans because of manpower. But the Germans had more advanced weaponry. And what they did is, because they were losing the ground war in Europe, they took that advanced weaponry down to South America, because they had some established colonies there, and then they took it down to Antarctica. And this was in the late 1930s. They actually had expeditions down to Antarctica and took much of this research and development down there. So many of the highest ranking of the Nazis and the deep occult secret society groups actually never lost. They never lost World War II. They went underground. They went down to Antarctica. And that's why in 1947, the Americans, because they found out the Germans went down to Antarctica, they commissioned Operation High Jump. Are you familiar with Operation High Jump?
No.
Okay, so Operation High Jump was an operation led by Admiral Richard Byrd in 1947. Actually, funny you mentioned 1947. So the Americans commissioned this operation that on the public record they called a scientific mission, but this mission actually had 33 naval vessels and 5,000 men. No scientific mission is going to be that large. This was a military mission that was under the cover of science. And they took 5,000 men and 30 ships and 13 planes, and they went down to Antarctica, Admiral Byrd and his Operation High Jump, and they were looking for these Nazi, German, secret under ice bases. Because you got to understand, under the ice of Antarctica, there's actually a lot of thermal vents that have created very large caverns. And I think there was a
Well, so
article
is this would this be the beginning of why Antarctica has become a no-go zone for so many people, and nobody can go on down there, and it is been effectively isolated from the rest of the world? When was
Yes.
when was it officially declared a place that nobody can go and stay claimed down there, and you need to be under strict international supervision to be able to do it?
That was when the Antarctica Treaty was designed and made in the mid 1950s. So it was a very rocky period. Lots of things going on in the 40s and 50s there. So when Operation High Jump in 1947 went down to Antarctica, Admiral Byrd and his crew got destroyed because the Nazis were able to build a handful of flying saucers, some of them called the Hanabu, and they were large enough and they actually had beam weapons on them, directed energy weapons. So they were able to build out this technology enough to where they could destroy the kind of archaic technology that the Americans had. The Americans, they did have, I mean, they had the Roswell crash that they were trying to work on. That actually happened post Operation High Jump, but there was another crash from the Battle of Los Angeles in 1943 that the Navy and the Army were able to obtain. So they were trying to reverse engineer some of the stuff, but they just were not making the progress that the Germans were. So back to the story, the Germans in Operation High Jump in Antarctica destroyed Admiral Richard Byrd and the Americans. They fled back to South America and eventually back up to America, at least the forces they had left. And then the Nazis participated in flyovers. So they actually began showing off their technology all over America. And this explains the whole rash of UFO sightings that we saw at the late 40s and the early 1950s. You can even look into 1952. It was in July. There was a flyover the Capitol building, huge mass sighting, bunch of things in the sky right over the U.S. Capitol. And it was actually happened on successive weekends.
I've seen that.
It wasn't just one event. Yep.
So now all of this you're talking about. So pretty much German technology, you're saying, has been responsible for a lot of the UFO mania in the U.S. Did that have extraterrestrial roots though?
It did. So the Germans and the Americans they obtained crashed craft. The Germans both were actually working with factions of extraterrestrial races. So, you know, in the behind the scenes secret space program world, there's just this huge amount of, well, we got to find out who's working with who and what's really going on, you know. And the Germans, they made some technology exchanges and some treaties or pacts, if you will, with malevolent, nefarious ET races. The Americans did not, and they essentially got technology from that. That's a reason they were able to build out this technology sooner and quicker. And then once they essentially, you know, destroyed Admiral Byrd in Operation High Jump in 47 and began showing off their technology over the Americas in the 1950s, they essentially forced the Truman and Eisenhower administrations into, you know, accepting the Nazis. That's what really stimulated Operation Paperclip. When the thousands of Nazi scientists came into America, the Americans were forced, many of them forced. I mean, of course, there were still deep state elements like the Dulles brothers and the Rockefellers, Rothschilds in America, but there was still a lot of goodness in this country in the 40s and 50s, I would say. But then once the Nazis were able to infiltrate, get all their scientists in here, they set up their scientists in the pinnacles of media, of aerospace, of the three-letter intel agencies, of pretty much everything, medical industry even. And that's where we really see the American military-industrial complex, the nefariousness of it begin to take root, and the just all of it began to get built out in the 50s and onwards.
That's a really interesting point right there, because that's another thing that we've also spoken about. So 47 is a year that I like to bring it up, because you think about all of how the progenitor of what has now become a vast American intelligence network really came into being. And then, of course, you have Dwight Eisenhower's alleged discovery of this pervasive, dare I say, shadow government that had already become, it had already really become a force, a secretive force in the 1950s, a force with no oversight. And we have that fabled encounter. That fabled encounter between President Eisenhower and both the Area 51 and S-Force facilities, threatening to invade with Colorado's First Army because they wouldn't let him know what they were working on. Apparently, there was There was, living gray aliens that were there, and of course, a lot of obtained craft and technology that was being worked on. And at that point, I guess that is where the that old phrase "plausible deniability" really became the way that our government compartmentalized itself and even kept itself from the public. So this all kind of feels like it overlaps with each other and creates a broader narrative. So it's interesting that you brought up the 50s and Eisenhower, because of course he warned against this autonomous blob of no oversight and intelligence and technology and military complex as he was leaving. And then of course in comes John F. Kennedy, who was a little bit less a little bit less easily manipulated than I guess people thought, because he was, as a lot of people say, probably the last American president.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm glad you touched on the unacknowledged nature of everything and the compartmentalized nature of everything, because you got to understand, a lot of these projects and programs that are going on that have billions, if not trillions of dollars funneling into them, they are literally unacknowledged. And that means if you're a colonel or lieutenant colonel or even a one-star general that's been read into this project and you're working on it, if a member of Congress, if a five-star general, even if the president himself asks you what's going on in that unacknowledged project, it's unacknowledged. You're not going to tell them. And that's how these operate. So many presidents have not been read in on much stuff, and that's why Eisenhower had to force himself to be read in on this stuff. He got a little bit of information, but they still didn't let him in on everything. And Eisenhower had to he made some unfortunate treaties with the Nazi breakaway civilizations and whatnot, and that's why he warned us.
Well, listen,
about what was
let me
going on.
ask you. You used the word unacknowledged a few times. Now, one of the recent releases on Netflix that I've spoken about a few times that I really like is the documentary Unacknowledged by Dr. Stephen Greer. Now, this area of study, UFOs, secret space programs, free energy technology, all that stuff. This area of study and the debate has attracted some very interesting people. And recently, we have the likes of, it's just so weird, the likes of Tom DeLonge of Blink-182. You have John Podesta. You have the Clintons. Now, Tom DeLonge very well may just be following a passion and being given contacts and special coaching like many cultural figures have from time to time. For example, just over the last year, we heard from Moby, the DJ, who came forward and said that he had CIA operatives urging him to post publicly about the dangers between the link between the dangers of the link between Russia and Donald Trump. So we already know that they use public figures, musical figures, to actually, to carry the water a little bit, even though they are not really in on the plot. But what do you think about people like the Podestas and the Clintons? What do they stand to gain from disclosure?
So what they stand to gain, we'll start there, is that they stand to gain, and mind you, disclosure is a very general word, because they can disclose something, but that doesn't mean they're disclosing everything, right? And that's the point here, is that if the Clintons and Podesta were to bring out their version of disclosure, what they would stand to gain from that is a whole public that would be completely confused, but more so distracted. They would be distracted by, oh, wow, look at this brand new technology that Lockheed is bringing out, or the State Department's bringing out, whatever the case is. Oh, look at this. Oh, these UFO videos and whatnot. So they're distracting us with these, I call them false flag disclosures, partial disclosures, if you will, to distract us from, of course, their crimes against humanity that are coming into the public domain, the human trafficking, all of the dark occult ritual practices that these elite are into. So that's what they stand to gain. And when you look at, of course, the names that are connected with this, quote, disclosure initiative, you have Podesta, you have Clinton, you have, Lockheed. When you actually look at Podesta's emails, you have Air Force generals and people at Lockheed that are involved with this. So, when understanding, of course, I could go more into how the Navy and the Air Force have been kind of combating each other with their own secret space programs and whatnot. But when you look at names like Lockheed and the Air Force in on a disclosure narrative, you got to scratch your head.
Skunk Works, and
yeah,
they all pop up.
Exactly, and understand that they're only going to be giving us a tiny fraction piece of disclosure. You know, the second director of Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich, back in the 90s said, we already have the technology to take ET home. It's going to take an act of God to get them out of the black projects. So we've had anti-gravity technology. We could have liberated our whole society off of fossil fuels literally 60 to 70 years ago. Are they going to tell us that?
This is what I
Probably
really
not.
like. This is what I see. Stuff like that is what what really compels me to talk about this, is because in that one documentary they actually call a segment "The Lost Century," that we're sitting in place that we should have been 100 years farther than we are right now. And whereas they're talking very frankly and talking very, it sounds very, very intriguing and very exciting to hear this coming out. But then, at the other hand, you have all these weird alliances and these weird people in the credits that are also going along with it, the aforementioned people. But and I guess that's the other thing that just came up for me, because we know that in December of last year is when we started seeing the mainstream media reporting on UFO sightings, military UFO encounters, providing radar and infrared cameras, and not reporting on it in a goofy science fiction kind of way. Very inquisitive, very real. And then on top of all of that, we hear that Harry Reid had a hand in appropriating tens of millions of dollars into New Age UFO research. So, I mean, it was a very interesting end of 2017 where I thought, is this real? Are we really standing on the brink of some kind of disclosure? And I know the difference between confirmation and disclosure, and I know how disclosure could be manipulated. But I wondered then, are we on the brink of something? But here we are, knocking on the door of June 2018, and we haven't spoken about it in a while.
Right, and I think the elite, they're waiting. And I say elite, when I say that, I mean not just the Clintons and Podestas, but I'm even talking about the names that we don't even know that are above them. So they're, and the public's waking up. They're waking up to the fact that the Rothschilds and these banks.
And I think we are. Hold on one second. Just want to make sure.
No worries. I've got just a few more sentences to say.
Yeah, no, we're back on right now. So
cool, we're back on.
Yeah, go to the end of that, because we're at the end anyway. So hold on. It went out right when you were saying. Wait a second, I have somebody. When you were saying the public is waking up, and you said something about the Rothschilds. So if you want to start right there, we're about to end this anyhow.
Okay, that's funny. I was in the interview I did with the X-22 report a few weeks ago. Our Skype cut out midway through. So
you're in a groove too.
Usually, why I don't use Skype. But anyway, so the public's waking up. They're waking up to the fact that the Rothschilds and the intelligence agencies and all of this have been completely infected with evil. And it's no coincidence that at that particular point in December that they started legitimizing the UFO issue and giving credence to it and running those stories, is because what was blowing up, QAnon and the deep state and so many things were going on, and the public was waking up, that it's that literal last straw. It's that last card that they're holding in their back pocket. And in December, they primed us a little more. They showed a little bit of that card, but they're waiting. They're waiting for more. And Antarctica is a very important thing to talk about and understand what's really going on with, because that could be the rest of their card there. They could pull out, we found some ancient ruins under the ice in Antarctica, or we found something, and wow the world, to distract them away from the dark occult disclosures.
Well, you know what, man? Maybe the next time you come on, we talk a little bit more about Antarctica. That would be really fun for me.
Yeah, we very much could. Antarctica is just one option, and you're always seeing these interesting stories being run in the media. We saw that huge asteroid that literally looked like a spaceship.
Yeah.
Like 6-9 months ago.
Yeah.
We see alien megastructure stories. We see fast radio bursts coming from space. It's like they're always pulling new potential stories. Even making them up, might even be completely made up, but it's like they always have certain cards they need to play if they need to, because that secret space program UFO topic, it's been so ridiculed, so much mis and disinformation out there about it, that people just don't know. They don't know what to think about it. So how easy of a false flag would that be to pull if they were to use Antarctica or use free energy or anti-gravity technology or, something along those lines and those topics as a false flag disclosure.
It's a strange big universe out there, man, and who
Truth
the hell
is stranger
knows?
in fiction, and it's more amazing. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Listen, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on, and let everybody know how they can find you and your ongoing work, even though you've hit this hiccup with YouTube.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing me that. You can go to destroyingtheillusion.com or jordansather.com, either one of those, and you can pretty much find links to most everything on there. But I would say for videos, you can find me on BitChute, find Destroying the Illusion on BitChute, or you can go to DTube and find me there. I'll be posting my videos to those platforms now, and then you can also find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Gab and Instagram too, just for my thoughts and whatever else I decide to post in memes and whatnot. So all those platforms.
Dude, man, thank you so much again, man. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you afterwards. This was a great call.
Thank you. I'd love to come on again. Thank you so much.
All right, man. Be well. And there you go. Rob, taking a lot of stuff in there. It
was good stuff. I wasn't gonna let him go. I think interesting point was something that you and I have touched on, where he talks about tribalism and like this cult of personality surrounding Q and how that could lead people away from themselves. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's applicable to this secret space program thing as well. I mean, you and I have talked about, I'm familiar with the David Wilcock and this stuff. So I always felt the same thing, where like it wasn't a matter of necessarily needing to be convinced after a certain point.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then so from there, you could see where people get carried away, and you have that scene in Independence Day where like, they're on top of the building, and then the thing like here to save us when, boom, right?
It comes in.
Right. And it was, he tied that all together and what he spoke about. So I thought it was really good.
I knew that Germans were working on saucer technology. I've seen the pictures, the black and whites and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I just never went that deep into it. You see, there's always a start date, and then there's always something that happens before it. Mm-hmm. So the start date that you have is usually never the start date.
Yeah.
So here I am talking about 47, and we're talking about early 20th.
Yeah.
But hey, man.
The Thule Society.
Oh, absolutely.